I first want to acknowledge that I speak to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation in Naarm, as they knew Melbourne. Pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their continuing custodianship of this place, from which we all benefit, all of us more recent immigrants. I'm really excited to join you. I've only been to Scotland once, but it's a wonderful place, and somewhere I'd love to come back to. I really thank you for the opportunity to join this celebration and pay tribute and renew our commitment to using this extraordinarily powerful tool that civil society, international organisations, and especially governments that kind of get this and are frustrated by the continuing obfuscation and delays and failures of disarmament, did what they could to try and break that terrible logjam by banning the weapons. Of course, they can't eliminate weapons they don't own, unfortunately, but that's our job to use this tool now, this extraordinary tool that we have. I just want to pick out a couple of highlights. There's an awful lot that one could say, but at an occasion like this, there's a few people who need to be acknowledged. And the whole idea of ICANN came from the remarkable Dr. Ron McCoy, a Malaysian obstetrician. And it was in 2005, after the NPT review conference, hundreds of diplomats for a whole month at God knows what cost could agree nothing on nuclear disarmament, and even if they had, it probably wouldn't have made much difference, as the agreement solemnly ignored from 5 years previously had shown. But it should have been a wake-up call. 3 months after that was the World Summit. It was the largest meeting of heads of state that had ever been held to that date. And we were all hoping that after the wake-up call of the failed review conference, something would happen. Not a single line or sentence about disarmament or nuclear weapons was agreed. So it was, I think, a real wake-up call for a lot of people that business as usual was badly broken, and we needed some kind of new approach. And the new approach, the obvious lesson, was the extraordinary inspiration not that many years before of the international campaign to ban landmines, working with initially just the Lloyd Axworthy and the Canadian government, and then others, Austria, Ireland, Norway, came on board, not the largest or most powerful states. And crucially, despite the opposition of the major users and producers and the largest and most powerful states, US, Russia, China, that treaty was able to be concluded and has changed the game. So there was an obvious lesson there, and the lesson of history, if you look at every indiscriminate, inhumane weapon, or indeed any weapon that we've been able to make substantial progress on controlling, fundamental to that progress, essential to it, has been codifying in international law a rejection of these weapons as beyond the pale for all nations. However they're used, they can only be indiscriminate and inhumane. That then provides the basis and motivation for the progressive efforts to eliminate the weapons. It was simply applying the lessons of history. And Ron challenged a number of us, especially through IPPNW, we need an international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And a few of us thought, that's a pretty good idea. We can help with that. And I think some of the principles that we decided on then, with some very strong help from Felicity, then Hill, now Ruby, working for WILP, who was the first staff person for ICANN, and others, agreed on a set of sort of principles for ICANN that I think have stood the campaign in really good stead, and I think can continue to do so. It needs to be a campaign coalition around a really sharp, focused goal. It needs to not reinvent the wheel of all the wonderful organisations that work on these issues. It needs to bring them together to sing from the same hymn sheet in a coordinated way. It needs to be global. It needs to involve young people. It needs to be rooted in what the weapons do, as Janet has said, and not the arcane abstractions about deterrence and parity and balance and abstract mythology. And it needs to link the science and the evidence with the voices of survivors, with the voices of those who've lived under a mushroom cloud, who know that this is not a great power chess game. This is indiscriminate destruction wrought upon generations, with dispossession and ill health and death over, across generations. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of with ICANN is the bringing to the fore and really giving power to those voices of the survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the nuclear test survivors from around the world. And I'm really proud of that. It was they, more than anything else, that cut through in New York during those negotiations, that constantly reminded the diplomats of why their work was and why this was not a political or nation state game. And you could hear a pin drop when Auntie Sue Common, Hassel-Dean, Setsuko Thurlow, Karina Lester, Ronald Oldham, others spoke in the room. The other thing I think is really, or one other aspect of this treaty that I think is absolutely wonderful, is the way that it was negotiated. And there was criticism for ICANN at the time that you don't have a plan B. We all hoped that after the Vienna Humanitarian Conference that South Africa would step up and host the next conference, and that it wouldn't be an evidence-based review, that it would be a negotiating meeting. And when that didn't happen, ICANN didn't have a definite plan. And that was seen by some as a weakness at the time. But I think it turned out to be a real strength, because one of the worst things we could have done is to fix on an idea that then failed and perhaps even distracted from other opportunities. The fact that this happened through the United Nations and the most inclusive and authoritative political, legal, and moral source of authority in the United Nations, the General Assembly, was masterful, using the General Assembly effectively, where the veto and that applies in the Security Council, and the requirement for consensus, which is a recipe for rock bottom lowest common denominator or no agreement, that paralyzes the NPT and the CD. The General Assembly could decide on substantive matters by 2/3 majority if agreement wasn't possible. So this could not be blocked. And this was extraordinary. A new, complex, magnificent international treaty addressing the most acute existential threat that humanity faces. The first specific legal prohibition on nuclear weapons was negotiated basically over a time frame of 7 months and 4 months of actual negotiations. It was extraordinary, the level of commitment and efficiency that saw this through. Because if this hadn't been negotiated by the 7th of July 2017, that UN mandate would have expired, and we would have been turned into pumpkins and back to the drawing board, seeking a new mandate. So, and the historic significance of that treaty, of course, and it's worth bringing out today, was recognised in the blessing of our dear friend Alfred, this is wonderful recognition of the historic importance of this treaty. And I just want to finish with saying the thing that gives me the most comfort that this treaty matters is the consistent level of opposition and dismay and really fierce pressure that it has aroused amongst the states that possess the weapons, that claim some unique right to threaten us all. If this treaty didn't matter, if this was some other piece of UN verbiage that they could happily pay lip service to but basically ignore, I'd be worried. But the fact that they've opposed this, put shameful pressure on some poor and on governments, and continue to do so. The reasons that they've acknowledged privately about why they oppose this treaty, that it challenges essentially the fundamental possession of nuclear weapons and the policy of nuclear deterrence, gives me great comfort that this treaty matters. Let's use it well to finish the job. Thank you.